everyone.
Howdy.
There's a lot more people here than maybe that'll make it easier, I don't know. Anyway, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Scott, and I've been coming to this church for a number of years. And I actually spoke about a little over a year ago. And the interesting thing about having me speak is that I actually don't identify as a Christian or as religious. I identify more as agnostic. And for those of you who don't know what that means, or maybe need a refresher, a lot of times people identify agnostic with the same thing as atheist. And it's a little bit different. If you can imagine, atheism is like on this side of the continuum, and Christianity is on this side of the continuum. Agnostics kind of float in the middle, somewhere more towards the left, more towards the right, depends our day. We're like the commitment phobics of religion. So that's kind of who I am and how I be and all that stuff. And getting up here and speaking is pretty scary, but it reminds me of the very first time I had to speak in front of a group of people, which was in my second semester of college. And I was taking an English composition course where we had to basically do a research paper and research a particular topic all semester long, and then present a major paper at the end of the semester, and then do a presentation on it in front of the entire class. Well, the professor didn't want to keep it too general. He wanted the students to get pretty specific. So he kind of narrowed down the topic as to what we're going to go off of, and his topic was that of myths. And I was thinking, I don't know what myths to talk about. And I was so confused for the longest time, I couldn't figure it out. And this was a few years after the killing of Matthew Shepard. So I was pretty angsty about religion at the time, because I had those images of the Westboro Baptist Church kind of like burned into my mind of them picketing his funeral. I was so angry. And so I decided that would be my myth, was the Bible versus homosexuality. And basically saying, the few sentences that the Bible has on homosexuality, they're nothing. So I got up there, or I basically, spent all semester researching and turned in this paper, and the professor actually loved it. He thought it was great. But he said, when it's time to present this, he's like, this is kind of controversial, and I need you to kind of warn the class about what you're going to say, and if any of them want to leave, they can leave and they won't get in trouble. So I warned the class, and nobody leaves. Everybody stays. Which makes me even more nervous. So I get up, I do my presentation, it goes good, people clap at the end like they're supposed to, and a few people come up to me after class and they say, oh, that was great, and I say thank you, and then I leave class. And when I'm leaving class, as I go out to campus, I see a group of students from the class, and they're in a circle holding hands with their heads bowed up. And I realize that they're praying, and this kind of weirds me out a little bit. And so I'm standing there watching them, and a girl notices me, and she breaks from the circle of prayer and comes over to me and hugs me and says, don't worry, we still love you. And I am thinking, well, that's very graceful. But that is not what I wanted to hear. And I realized something. I realized that these were the people that I wanted to have an impact on with my speech. These were the people that I wanted to reach out to. The people that had congratulated me and said I did a good job, those were the people who already agreed with me. So I wanted to reach these people, and I did it wrong somehow. I messed up, and I wasn't quite sure where that went. So it kind of reminds me of getting to be up here again today and speaking on something that is very foreign to me and to an audience who I may not do a great job of reaching out to, but hopefully I do. And the cool thing that I get to do is I actually get to speak from Scripture. So it's not like I just get up here and talk about whatever I want. Jim actually assigns me Scripture to talk about. And one of them, the main one, was from the book of Esther. And he basically said, just read the whole book and whatever speaks to you, go from it. And so I did. It was actually like the coolest story. I loved it. It was so interesting. And so I wanted to kind of go over the story, but I had to do it like point by point or else we'd just be here all day. So basically, there was Esther, who was selected to be queen because she was so beautiful, which I thought was interesting. Like, that's how we select a queen, is their beauty. But she was also Jewish, and when they selected her as queen, they didn't know this. Because she was so beautiful, they probably didn't pay attention to that side. But she was Jewish, and so the king never continued to have her as a queen and never knew that she was Jewish. Well, in the meantime, Esther had a cousin named Mordecai. And Mordecai was angry about something, and so to protest in his belief, he sat at the gates of the kingdom every day and refused to bow to royalty. Well, then there's another guy that's like the king's right-hand man, and his name was Haman, or Haman. I'm going to call him Haman because that's what I've been calling him. So Haman sees Mordecai not bowing, and he gets angry and upset, and says you need to bow, and Mordecai refuses. And after time again of this, Haman finally has had enough, and he says, okay, we're carrying out an order to kill all the Jews in the city. That's a pretty intense order. Once Esther finds out about this, she goes ahead and decides that she needs to take action. And so she gathers Haman and the king in a special dinner and reveals that she herself is a Jew, which is kind of a dangerous thing to do, knowing that the Jews are now ordered to be killed. So she could have gotten off kind of easy by not saying anything, but instead, she stood up for what she believed in, and she came out as a Jew. Now, I won't get into what happened kind of yet. I'll save that. Hopefully it's a little juicy. But I think there's a lot of lessons that come out of this story that I could have talked about. But one of the things that really fascinated me, that I really liked, was this idea of standing up for what you believed in. And we definitely have a lot of people doing that here. We have Mordecai, who's sitting at the gates. He's not standing, but he's sitting at the gates, refusing to bow and protest for his belief. And then we have Haman, who believes that you should be bowing. That's his belief. And then we have Esther, who believes in not annihilating her people, which is probably a pretty understandable belief. And so we have all these people who have these beliefs, and they go about doing it differently. And I think that's what's also interesting, is their actions are all different. When Mordecai didn't stand up, or didn't bow, in order to stand up for his belief, Haman ordered for the Jews to be killed. And then when Esther heard about this, she stood up for her belief by coming out as a Jew. So I think they definitely did it differently. And the way that they did it differently, I feel like there's also a common thread, and that common thread is the notion of sacrifice. Haman kind of sacrificed other people for his belief, and Esther kind of sacrificed herself. And I think that's a huge difference, and something to really, really be noted, and something that I really want to get further into and talk more about today. What is this notion of sacrifice? And what does it mean to sacrifice other people? And what does it mean to sacrifice ourselves? Now, I think this translates into modern times pretty easily, and I know the concept of sacrificing religion can often mean like kind of killing somebody to appease your God. I'm not talking about that kind of sacrifice, but more so a more social, modern version of it, and a definition to clarify that I'm using is that basically like self-sacrifice is the idea of foregoing one's immediate self-interest in order to promote the well-being of another. That's pretty nice, I like that. And I think it translates into modern times, but there's another definition, kind of a definition or a quote that I like about our culture in the United States, and it says, in Western societies such as the United States, there is particularly a strong value that emphasizes individualism, autonomy, and the relentless pursuit of one's own personal truth. That doesn't really match up with self-sacrifice a lot. But I think that's true. That's kind of the norm in our country, is to kind of pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, and we do that by any means possible. We don't kind of really pay much attention to the others around us. But I think we have a lot of that going on right now, especially with the election in full swing, and with this next picture. Yeah, we have some Obama versus Romney going on. Again, the election season is in full swing, so people are definitely coming out with their beliefs, and the beliefs are clashing. And some of these people are standing up for their beliefs by sacrificing others, and some are doing it by sacrificing themselves. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic. Then, of course, one thing that's really kind of spooky on speaking on today's date is we're 2 days away from 9/11. So we have this, and this is kind of one of the ultimate examples, and the most horrific example in modern history of people standing up for what they believe in. And we have, the guys who were flying the planes who probably believed they were sacrificing themselves, when in reality we know that they were also sacrificing thousands of people in the process, and so many people died. Well, as relevant as it is to the date, I don't want to speak too much on this just because it's so heavy and so dark. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is Chick-fil-A Day. And I'm sure we've already talked about this in church somewhere, but I find it so relevant. And for those of you who aren't aware of what Chick-fil-A Day was this recent campaign that Chick-fil-A basically had, where the owner of the company came out and said, no, we don't agree with gay people. We are anti-gay rights, and we will do everything we can to support that. And so everybody who supported them then had Chick-fil-A Day, where they would go eat their sandwiches in support of this. And I just noticed this earlier, that on the thing it says, take your family, friends, and colleagues to Chick-fil-A for all 3 meals. I think that's disgusting. I'm a little biased because I'm a vegetarian, but even when I loved Chick-fil-A, I would not have eaten 3 meals. It's really gross. So, of course, all of these examples, the election, 9/11, Chick-fil-A Day, these are all examples of people standing up for what they believe in. But how are they doing it? And is it going to have an impact? And what does it mean? Now, of course, it would be really easy for me to keep talking about Chick-fil-A Day and throw them under the bus, because I want to. But that would be too easy, and I like to play a little devil's advocate. So I'd like to go on something a little different here, and that would be this campaign that they called Day Without a Gay. I don't know if people remember this, but this was a concept back in 2008, where basically the notion would be everybody would call into work under the fact that they were gay. And I think the theory would be that everybody would be missing their gays so much that they would feel this void without the gays. So they wanted their gays. But I don't think it worked all that well because we've never done this. But I remember around this time this was happening. My partner Luke and I were talking about this, and if you guys don't know Luke, and I think most of you do, but if you don't know Luke, he's this really brilliant man who is one of the most forward-thinking people I've ever met in my life. Seriously, especially when it comes to social issues and empathy towards human beings, he's the master. And he was talking about this, and he's like, I think it's an okay idea, but what would it be like if people called into work and then they went and volunteered somewhere? Like, that is an idea. Because then not only people would fill the void that they miss with the gay people, but then they would also go on to see how helpful and what an important part of society that, gay people can be. So I thought that was just absolutely brilliant, but of course that's not the way it worked. So, in the end, the Day Without a Gay in 2008, who do we think we sacrificed in that? Probably our employers a little bit. They probably weren't like, oh my gosh, I miss my gays, this work isn't getting done. They're probably like, people aren't showing up, what the heck, like this isn't the way it's supposed to go. Like they're probably pretty frustrated. So I don't think it really worked all that well. And on that note, I just kind of want to slip into the second reading because I thought it was really interesting, just real quick. And I'm just going to read it because I can't quote it verbatim. But it says, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill, and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith, by itself, if it has no works, is dead. That last line is a little harsh, and that's why I kind of liked it. So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. The reason why I like this and wanted to use this also is because you can replace the word faith with the word belief, and it still kind of really applies. So belief by itself, if it has no works, is dead. So when we believe something, we definitely have to act on it if we want to make some impact in our belief. Now, continuing to use the Day Without a Gay example, how we acted, the action that we took, did that really live up to what we believed in? I think what we believed in is that we wanted to be, as gay people, we wanted to show others that we want to be valued. But I think first, we would also need to show that we also value other people. And that's kind of maybe where the disjuncture happened. We didn't really self-sacrifice ourselves in that because, hey, volunteering someplace else, that would have been sacrificing our time. Instead, we took a little vacation. Now, I know that Bible times are very easy to understand. They're very black and white and very simple, right? And modern times are confusing. You know, in the Bible, you have these stories where Jews are getting either annihilated or not annihilated, or you're coming out as a Jew or you're not coming out as a Jew. It's very easy. And in modern times, it's very confusing. We're calling in gay to work. We're eating chicken sandwiches. Like, what's going on? It's confusing. So in order to kind of clear all that up, I always like to draw in a little bit of psychology into almost everything I do. And there's a psychologist by the name of Sherry Fisher, and she studied the idea of self-sacrifice amongst kindergarten students through 12th grade. And she's able to build this like cluster of qualities that kind of go along with self-sacrifice. And I don't go over all of them because there were a lot, but there were 5 that really stood out for me. So when it comes to self-sacrifice, there are these qualities such as it's something that's really fulfilling to engage in. It's something that's really morally valued by others. It doesn't diminish others, and I think that's an important one. It has unpleasant opposites, which this one confused me, but basically it means it has unpleasant opposites such as selfishness, coldness, thoughtlessness, egoism, stuff like that. And finally, it's distinct from other positive traits. So using these qualities, we can really get a sense of where these whole things laid on this continuum of sacrifice, like if it's self or if it's others. We can really get an idea of kind of how that works. So looking back when I made that speech in front of the class at my school, I look back on that and I think I had a lot of those unpleasant opposites. I was kind of ruthless in that. Like I went in and I was not very empathetic to the idea of those people who were religious, and I was kind of very selfish, or maybe not selfish, but very thoughtlessness. And I could have been very diminishing in that. Like diminishing to those who were religious in the class and not very sensitive to that. And then of course coming out and seeing them praying and knowing I didn't have an impact, that wasn't very fulfilling for me. So I feel like I kind of failed on all of those qualities. At Chick-fil-A Day, I mean, does anybody think that really worked? Well, I don't think a whole lot of gay people probably sat around and were like, oh my god, they're eating chicken sandwiches. Like, maybe we shouldn't be gay. So, if anything, rallied people up and got them even more flustered and ready to fight. And so, probably not a great thing. And even the day without a gay, again, talking about it, we can see that it probably wasn't effective since we've never done it again since. I don't think a lot of people really felt the impact that we were hoping for when the campaign was developed. Now, I think for me, there's all these great examples of how stuff didn't work when we didn't really sacrifice in the right way. And for me, luckily, I got to experience a sense of self-sacrifice last year. And another thing that's spooky about speaking on today's date is the notion that tomorrow is the anniversary of the date that I got my HIV diagnosis. So I'm not up here to talk about my HIV, but I think it's so interesting because it's something I'm so passionate about. It's something that I've become so invested in. And one of my beliefs after I struggled with HIV, one of the things that I believed in was being open about my status. And the reason why I wanted to be open about my status was for several things. For one, it would help those who were struggling with it secretly or in private. It would help those who didn't want to hear about it or who wanted to ignore it, that it was still happening in our community. And then hopefully from there, it would help things like people getting tested and help educating people. So I figured the best thing I could do with my HIV diagnosis was be open about it, and that was my belief. Well, about a year ago, Out Front Colorado, the local publication, mostly for gay and lesbian people, but if you're straight, you can read it too. They contacted me and they asked if I wanted to be part of this really dynamic cover that was going to be of a group of people who are HIV positive locally and very proactive about their status. And of course, I was such a nerd, I totally thought that they were asking me to write a piece for it. And so I actually was like, yeah, and then I sent them pieces of my writings. And they're like, no, we just want you to be on the cover with this group. And I was like, okay. That's kind of scary, you know, being on the cover, you know, with HIV and plastered all around town, but it's with this group of people and it's what I believe in, so I'll do it. So I said yes. But slowly, one by one, people started dropping out of this. And I assume it's because they were scared, because that's a scary thing. But when it came down to it, there were 2 of us left. And I remember when I was talking on the phone with the people from out front, and we were talking about this, they mentioned the name of the other guy who was going to be posing with me. And I immediately registered who he was in my brain, or registered his name, and I went online and stalked him immediately, because that's what we do. And I found out he was this young, like 20-something, 22-year-old, like really cute blonde guy. And I immediately felt threatened, and which is funny because I'm not really into like young, blonde, 22-year-olds. So that's not really my thing. But I felt totally intimidated, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be the uglier guy in Alpha. And the reason I even say that is because that was so self-diminishing, and we can't be self-diminishing either, so that's not good. But the day comes for us to do the photo shoot, and I show up, and the other guy doesn't show up. And they call him, and he doesn't answer his phone, and they leave voicemails, and he doesn't call back. So they're like, okay, you have to go it alone. And at first I'm like, yes, now I don't have to be the other guy. But then I'm like, oh, now I have to be the only guy in Alpha. And this is not a subtle photo. Like, this is pretty blatant. And I was like, this is gonna be me all across town. And I got really, really scared. Well, very kindly enough, Outfront actually did ask me to write the piece that went along with this cover. So I got the chance to tell my story. But in the process of the days waiting for this to come out and hit the newsstands, I was terrified. I mean, this was going to be all over town, but especially in places that were gay places that I would go to, and everybody would know this now. Like, I was wanting to be out, and it was something I believed in, but this was turning into a poster boy. Not something I had quite imagined, and I felt like I was definitely throwing myself under the bus. I felt like I was definitely doing a sacrifice. I was sacrificing myself in order to stand up for what I believed in. So how was this going to work? People were really nervous for me. My family was terrified for me. And so it came out, and in a couple days, emails started rolling in. Whether it was to Outfront or whether it was to my Facebook page, people started emailing me, and none of it was bad. They were all saying thank you. Whether it was somebody who was HIV negatives for saying thank you for helping me understand this better, or whether it was somebody who was HIV positive and saying thank you for helping me not feel alone, or any of those things. It was amazing. I had coworkers who went out to restaurants and saw it sitting there and were like, what is this? But in a really good way. And then one of my favorite things was there was this guy at the gym who I had seen a couple times there, and he was straight, but he stopped me and said he had seen it at a restaurant and read it and loved it, and he loved it because he felt connected with it and the fact that he was missing one leg. And I thought that was really cool, that we kind of connected on our ailments together. And with a heterosexual one-legged man, like that doesn't get that. So this went over so well that Outfront actually had me continue to be a regular writer, and I've written in every issue since. So I threw myself under the bus, and for it I got some really amazing things. And I think that's what's really important. It's definitely not the easier thing to do, but in the end it had the impact that I originally wanted to have on people. And that's what was important. So after that story, I want to wrap things up because I know I go along a little bit. And I like to leave people with more questions than answers because I feel like that's a bit better to do. And I ask things, what do you believe in? How would you stand up for it? And how would you sacrifice for it? And from the story of Esther, we know that one is easier than the other. We know it's kind of easier to throw other people under the bus, but does it have the impact that we want to have? Esther didn't throw other people under the bus. She threw herself under the bus, and she was the one who prevailed. Haman ended up getting hung on the very gallows that were actually meant for Mordecai. So it's kind of ironic. I think it would make a very good movie scene. But yeah, so obviously the guy who threw other people under the bus, he wasn't the one who kind of won his side. He ended up kind of getting in trouble. And the other thing that I wish I could have had time to talk about is I don't think this has to apply to some of these big social issues that I've talked about today. I think these can really apply to an individual level, where it comes down to us in dealing with our friends, or our romantic relationships, or people in our lives. So I don't think it has to be just big social issues. It can be these individual ways of thinking as well, and this notion of sacrifice. So when it comes to either big social issues or your individual issues in your relationships or friendships, keep those things in mind. Is what you're doing, is it something that's fulfilling? Is what you're doing, is it something that is morally valued? Is it something that diminishes somebody else? Does it have some of those unpleasant opposites? Or is it something that's distinct from the positive traits that you guys already have?